welcome back to Undulations. This is my second video on the core Volca Modular. In the first video we talked about how that you could use the source module over here to get sounds to the output, and we talked some about how you could use the utility module to modify those signals and sounds. And then we even went further and looked at how with the normal lines of this device, so the built-in connections, that you can automatically get a sound out of the keyboard or by running a sequence. And then we also looked in depth at the first of the functions. This is basically an envelope, and we're able to control the temporal quality of the sound. And then we looked at the low-pass gate, which does some filtering and also has some dynamic effects. And the last thing we looked at was the space out feature. And so in this video, we'll go over how the second low-pass gate is basically identical to the first one, but it's hooked into the system differently, which can be useful. And then I'll talk some about the split module, which allows you to fan out signals, route them to multiple spots, and you can also sort of use it backwards as a mixer. And then we'll take a look at the Woggle Module, which gives us some randomization, a stepped random voltage and a smooth random voltage, and it can also be a source of audio noise. Then we're going to take a long look at the second envelope feature here, the second function. And this is different, and it's commonly used as a low frequency oscillator, a LFO. And so I'll be showing you how to do that. And if you're not familiar with LFOs, it's just another way to, at either a slow speed or a even fast speed, modulate some of the parameters on this device automatically. And then I'll be wanting to focus a lot on the clock module of the Volca Modular, because when you combine the clock module and the sequencer down here, it's very powerful. And I don't want to get too philosophical about it, but this Volca is quite different in the sense that the sequencer is more a part of it. It's not just like there's a instrument that is attached or connected to a sequencer. It's more like that they are a lot more intertwined. And so, for example, right now I've got a sort of a rising note there. Well, that's also a rising voltage that I can tap off of up here at the clock. And say, for example, I wanted to control the amount of the space effect. So higher pitches will have more reverb as it passes through the sequence. And so that's a very powerful sort of feature that you can do with the sequencer. The other thing, and I really want to emphasize this, is that even though there's one official LFO, there's like a patch for it in the manual, don't forget that all of these knobs, except for a few of them, they can be automated by motion sequencing. And so in some ways that is like an LFO as well. So I'll just give you an example of that. Let me hit record. And so I'm able to just enter in that modulation as a part of the sequence. That's very handy too. And you can have motion sequencing patterns that go across, that chain the different memory locations on this, so you can do a lot of elaborate stuff. All right, let's get to it. Okay, so to start with, all I've got are some patch cables that duplicate some of the normal connections that are on the device. Right now it sounds like this. And I'm using the function 1, envelope 1, and recall that it has a hold feature. So you don't hear that release until I let off of the keyboard. Now, I'm going to move the gate that is triggering that envelope over to the other envelope. And that will be triggering the other envelope right now, but we'll still just hear this through the first envelope. Sounds exactly the same. That's because a normal connection that gets patched out of doesn't go away. So this is still being triggered. Now, next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to move over to the envelope voltage output, the plus, from the second function, the second envelope, and I'm going to send that into the level on the first low pass gate. Now when I hit that, it will sound different. And the reason for that is that, unlike the gate case, once you send an input by a patch cable to where a normal connection goes into, that normal connection gets overridden. So now this second envelope, second function, it has some different features where you can control the shape, and you can also control the time on it. And then I should emphasize that there is no hold feature on this one. So it goes through its cycle without waiting for the keyboard to be released. And so now I'm going to continue to sort of migrate these patch cables. I'm going to move things over here to the second low pass gate. I'm going to turn down the first low pass gate. And so now we're getting a signal that's like this. Now the way things are set up with the normal connections, the LPG2 is just mixed into the normal signal. And so I can go ahead and turn this back up, and we're going to hear sound from both gates. And so this is basically a sort of hybrid or combined envelope that you can make out of both of the functions. And then as sort of a finishing touch on this, I'm going to switch the input to LPG2 over to the mod oscillator that we talked about in the last video. And that sounds like this. And so using this setup, you could make a sound that sounded something like this. And you'll notice that depending on how long I hold, it sounds quite different. While it's very powerful to use both of these functions together and with the gates to make a hybrid sound, you can also start to think about how to use them independently. We're going to start a sequence and think about how that each of these gates is being triggered at the same time, every time. And so one thing we can do to change things up is to use some of the fractional gates. So the /4 over here, this means that it sends out a gating signal on every fourth trigger. So you can hear that. And then I'm going to move the function 2 gate to every third trigger. And so you can kind of hear that. To really emphasize it, I'm going to make one of the functions go to be a bass. And then you can modify this sound a lot by changing the timing of the envelopes. clean slate. Now we're going to talk about using this second function module as a low frequency oscillator. There is a trigger output from the module that comes at the end of the envelope cycle. We're going to feed that back into the input trigger. And so when I use the envelope voltage to actuate this low pass gate, we're going to hear a repeating sound. Now, and we can control the tempo or period of that effect by changing the function shape. And it also changes the sound a lot as well. And particularly at the triangle setting and at low times, you can get up towards audio frequency. And then on the subject of audio frequency, we're using that to actuate the gate, but we can also just use that as the signal. So I've got that going into LPG1, and then when I push one of the keys, you hear tone, but you'll see that it doesn't matter which key I push because the tone is actually coming from the LFO. So if I hold a key down, I can change the frequency. Now, what if I want to turn this into something that's more playable? One way to do that is to take the signal out, and I'm basically using patch cables to bypass the mixing, and instead I'm going to chain the low pass gates together. So it's passing first through one and then through the other. And now we can't hear anything, but I'm going to take the envelope voltage and have that actuate this second low pass gate. So now when I hit this, and I'm going to change the timing a little bit. And the shape. And I won't go into all the details on this one, but with a little more effort, using the utility function, I've come up with this sound. So the woggle feature on the Volca Modular has got some nice noise. It's sort of pink noise, kind of tonal to the keyboard, and you can just send that straight out the regular way, darken it some, filter it with the low pass gate, and add some space to it. It's very nice. But you can use that noise for more than just an audio signal. I'm going to take the pitch out of the clock, send that into the A, and then I'm going to take the A plus B times C and send that over into the source pitch input. So as this is, it's just going to give me the note that I have. And yet if I add into that the noise, I can start to roughen it up. And it can get quite rough. But where we're headed with this is to use this pitch as sort of a sensitive voltage meter. Our ears can detect the pitch quite well, so it's going to let us hear things about what's going on with the woggle. This is the smooth random voltage. I'm going to hit a note. So the woggle is moving smoothly. You can hear that glide, and it's going from one voltage level to another. Then now I want to do it without the glide, use the stepped voltage. And we'll do this. And I've already got a sequence loaded up that is just the same note hit time after time. But because of that woggle, we get some nice randomness to it. And you can control the depth of that randomness with the utility knob. And then because I've put this sequence on every other note, all you have to do is throw in the stochastic feature to get some randomness to the tempo also. And that's sort of a classic modular sound, but note that we're doing it with a sequencer. Now we're going to use the LFO to do something similar to that. So by the end, this next patch will look fairly complicated, but if we just go through it one step at a time, it will be fine. First thing is that we want to self-trigger the LFO, and so we would do that by putting the out to the in. But if we do that, then we're not going to be able to use that LFO trigger for anything else, specifically the woggle. So what I'm going to do is have the LFO out trigger, so that function out trigger, go into the split, and then I'm going to have one of them of the split come back out. And so that's the self-triggering cycle there. But because of the split, we can tap off of that and actually use the LFO to trigger the woggle. And so now you can see the lights flashing at the different levels of random voltage. And then we're going to take that random voltage and use it for two things. And so again, to do that, we're going to need to use the split. So we send it into the split, and then we have one of those come out and go into the time of the LFO itself. And then the other one I'm going to have come down to the B of the utility. And we've done this sort of thing a lot, where we're going to scale that random voltage to suit our needs over at the pitch. And then the last thing we need is to be able to trigger the low pass gate by using the plus output from this second function. I've already got some space on. And you can work through some of the logic. The shorter notes are more percussive because the time has been pushed down. So low frequency, low time. And then the higher frequency notes, those are going to have a stretched out time. And by varying the time, the shape, and the C parameter, you can get a lot of different types of sounds. So I've talked a lot about using the second function module as a low frequency oscillator, and I also really wanted to try to use the first function module for the same sort of thing. Couldn't find any way to really get it to auto trigger, self trigger by patching, say, the trigger out to the gate input. If anybody knows how to make that work, please let me know in the comments. But if you think about it, this sequence that I have running, this is sort of a low frequency oscillation in the sense that there is a timing to it that you can control with the clock, and there's also a shaping to it that you can control with the function parameters. But it's kind of limited because the sequence is locked into a single note. So I decided to try taking the sync out signal, which is basically a pulse at the clock divided by 2 time, and I send that to the CV in, and then I'm going to take that to the gate. And you'll hear that this sounds basically the same. Now, I'm using a little patch cable from my Arturia microbrute. You could use a longer patch cable if that's what you had. You could even use one of these aux cables that comes with the Volca. And so what this gains us is now the keyboard is freed up. And I can change the tempo. So you can get some very nice effects. The tempo can be such that there are gaps, or that it causes it to re-trigger in the function module. So there are a lot of possibilities of things you can do with this. Sure has been a lot of fun playing with the Volca Modular. If you like this sort of thing, make sure to check out my Instagram for smaller clips and subscribe for future posts on this channel. Thanks a lot for watching.